Hey guys, Brianna here. I'm going to tie a jig really quickly to just show you guys some basics. I'm going to tie it with yarn because it's really quick and easy, and if you're going to start tying jigs, it's really a great way to just get familiar with how everything holds and lays on the jig. It's really easy. The alternative that I use for steelhead jigs is typically hackle. For twitching jigs or humpy jigs, there's a lot of different ways that I do, but for steelhead jigs, I pretty much either use yarn or hackle. So I'm going to start with my thread, and I'm going to start about halfway up to the jig head, and I'm just going to wrap it around. You can wrap either direction. You're just going to consistently have to choose a direction to wrap the entire jig in. So I am just wrapping it on top of itself so that it ends up holding very firm. And once I feel like I have enough wraps and it's not going to move or slide along the jig head, I'm going to trim the end, and then I'm going to lay my yarn on. So right about the middle is where I am going to start my yarn. So that's going to be the tail part. So I'll hold my yarn in place, and then following the same direction, I'm just going to wrap it on top. Pretty tight, not enough to rip the thread, but pretty tight. And then I will trim the excess. I like yarn because I can hold scent without compromising the body of it. You can't really put scent on a marabou jig because it slicks the feathers down, and so you lose all of your body. I'm going to go back over the top of this yarn so that I don't have this big puff ball here and everything's nice and secure. So once I have that laid down nice and flat, I am going to wrap my body, and I usually use chenille or mylar. I like this because it's nice and full and it's sparkly and flashy. Oh, I forgot, actually I want to put on some little legs. This is just a little hoochie, and I want these pink legs, and I'm going to add some legs onto my jig, and I need to do that before the body. So I'm going to cut 2 legs off this hoochie. There's a lot of different stuff that you can use for these legs, and I'll show you at the end another place that I like to put these legs. I want them to sit on either side of my jig, both sides of my jig, like this. And I want them to be a little bit longer than the body, not excessively long, but just a little bit past the end of the hook shank. So again, I'm just going to hold it in place, wrap it firmly. And then I am also going to take my other little leg here, and I'm going to put it on the other side. And I like them nice and even. I want them both directly on the sides, not on top or bottom. So hold them firmly in place and wrap over the top of them again so you don't have them sticking out on your jig. Everything's nice and compact and everything's really tight. It's not going to slide around if you catch a couple fish on it. And then I'm going to start back at the bottom here, in the middle I should say. And I want to add just a couple pieces of flash. This flash goes a really long way, so I'm literally just going to grab 3 tiny strands. And even though it might not look like very much on the jig, it is going to look like a lot when it's in the water, reflecting off of the water, especially if it's sunny outside. So I just have 3 pieces here, and they're not perfectly even. I'm going to trim them down in a little bit later on to get them to be the right length so that I can just tie them on really quickly. So I'm just going to lay them on the top. I want them to just kind of sit on top of the yarn tail. So I will hold them here and then wrap them securely. I kind of want to hold them in place to make sure they don't slide around until I can get them wrapped very tightly. And now that I have them wrapped, I will trim the excess at the top and trim the bottom to be the same length as my yarn tail. And now I'm going to use my mylar, and I'm going to hold it in place. And I'm going to wrap just the end on. Wrap it real tight, and then I'm going to wrap all the way up the body of the jig. All the way up to the jig head, because that's the next place that I'm going to wrap. So then I'm going to take my body, and I'm going to wrap it around. I'm not going to overlap. I'm going to try to keep it all nice and really smooth. This has a really big profile, so I don't want to use a ton of it, but I want to use enough to get all the way up the body. So once I get all the way up, I'm going to hold it out, and then I'm going to hold it straight out, and I'm going to wrap this along the back side of the jig head to firmly secure that loose end here so that I can trim it down. And I will trim it off so it's a little easier to finish wrapping that. Try to use sharp scissors. My scissors are really dull and it's really difficult to cut things. So then I will finish wrapping that up and get it really nice and secure so that it does not fall apart. And I can try to move everything on here. Everything is really, really tight on this jig. It's not doing a lot of twisting or turning. And the last step that I'm going to do is a little bit trickier, but I really like my jigs to be full and have a lot of profile. I'm typically fishing bigger and heavier water, so I like a really full-bodied jig. So this is a piece of hackle. It's a nice little feather. And as you can see with all feathers, the pieces of fiber go in a specific direction. So they're all going up and out. So when I tie this, I want to make sure that I'm going with the direction of the feathers and not against them. So I'm actually going to fold this in half, right down the middle, like hot dog style. I'm kind of going to squeeze it down a little bit. And actually, I want to use the feathers closer to the tip because I don't want my collar to be super long. So I'm going to use these shorter feathers, fold it kind of hot dog style. I'll show you what I mean in a second. So you can see that instead of my feathers laying nice and flat, they're starting to lay downwards towards each other. And it's not going to be perfect before I tie. They never will be, but it's going to be closer. So kind of hard to see. For the most part, they're facing down now instead of so straight out. So I'm going to take my loose end here, and I'm going to tie this guy on, just this tiny little piece here. That's the middle of the feather. And I'm going to tie that guy on. And I still want to make sure that my feathers are all facing downwards, down my jig. I don't want them facing this other direction. So then I'm going to keep smoothing this down the whole time I wrap it. I am going to wrap around the collar, and I still want to make sure that my feathers are not twisting. Everything is staying facing down. You can see how my feathers are starting to lay down. If they weren't facing that way, they would start to lay the opposite direction. So I'm just going to get one good full wrap in. Again, this is getting to be a really big bodied jig, so I'm going to stop wrapping. I'm going to hold this out the same way I held out my body, and I'm going to wrap around to secure the top. And before I cut that, because I don't want it to unravel, I'm going to really make sure that I get that secure. So I'm going to hold the body of my jig, hold everything down and away. I'm going to end up cutting this piece off here, because now it's just extra. So the other thing you can do with the legs is kind of make antenna at the top. That's what they remind me of. So I don't usually use rubber legs for this. They make a different type, kind of like these. This is a really old saltwater spinner, but I like these legs. They're really thin, super flexible. So you could take this and tie it around the top and sort of have a little antenna that kind of hangs off the top there. I don't want that on this jig, but sometimes that's also what I do. So then you're going to half hitch it. So I'm creating a little crisscross here, and I'm going to stick my jig head through and pull tight. I do a bunch of these, and this is your final piece here. This is what secures everything in place. And then you would want to use some jig cement to top this off to really make sure that nothing comes undone. I don't have any of that right now, so I'm just going to leave this as is, but before I go fish it, I will make sure to put some cement on there to seal it. So here's my final jig. I have a really nice full body. Everything is really secure. Everything goes down. When it's in the water, it will, you know, kind of go back out, but it's not all crazy and pointed everywhere. You can see my little rubber legs are a little bit past the end of my hook shank there. And I typically will tip this with a piece of cured prawn or uncured if you don't have time. You can dye them pink. Usually it's pink or white. And then it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little bit of flash there on top of the yarn.